do share your questions via the chat service and also the Q&A. We've also posted in our chat, on the chat, just checking on the chat, we'll be posting on our chat the social media platforms for the Southern Africa Trust. So please do follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. We'll also be posting the hashtags for the dialogue, hashtag COP27, hashtag climate justice, and hashtag climate change. And also take the opportunity to actually visit our website, the Southern Africa Trust website. We have a sub-site on our website for the COP27 campaign, where you will get updates on the upcoming dialogues, the resources around the COP27. This platform is also open to our partners to share whatever publications have produced materials, and we can post it on our sub-site. Also on the website, you'll find a tab for our Knowledge Hub. The Southern Africa Trust has been producing various research and knowledge materials, also with our partners. So you will find around selected thematic areas, research products, which you will find useful in your work. And we are also hosting from our partners. And if you want to share certain knowledge material that you would like to post on our Knowledge Hub, you are welcome to share with them with us. But a very big welcome to everyone. And I would like to start by just introducing our panelists. I'll introduce them even as they join in. If they'll be able to join in, they'll be able to share more details. But we are supposed to be joined by Washington Zakata, who's the Director of Climate Change Management in the Ministry of Environment, Water and Climate in the government of Zimbabwe. He's a national coordinator for climate change and also advising the government on climate change in Zimbabwe. We are also joined by Alhaji Siraj Ba from Sierra Leone, who's the CEO of Raxol Trading. He established this company at the age of 18, and I was trying to think what I was doing at 18, which produces biodegradable paper bags from banana fiber. The company has now expanded into agriculture, green energy sectors, where they use innovative means to produce biobriquettes from coconut waste and biocoals. And I think we'll be able to get more details from him. And he's already joined us, online for this conversation. We are also to be joined by Ephraim Shitima, who's the director of the newly created Department of Green Economy and Climate Change in the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment in Zambia. He's also Zambia's national focal point and also under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, where he serves as the chair of the Africa Group of Negotiators on Climate Change for 2022 to 2023. So before we get into the discussion, I thought it was really important to provide context and really set the scene for this conversation. I would like to just go back because this dialogue is looking at, what were the outcomes of COP26, and we would like to really go back before the COP26 and look at the context in which and how things had changed ahead of the summit. We were experiencing, and there were a lot of changes in the global environment with multi-exigencies related to the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw an increase in poverty levels, food insecurity situations, massive job losses, and obviously unemployment skyrocketed. But when you look at the context of Southern Africa, the burden of extreme poverty, even before the pandemic, was already very heavy. And according to the Institute of Security Studies, the pre-pandemic estimates was that Southern Africa accounted for 9% of extreme poverty globally. And nearly 88 million people were living in extreme poverty. And that was pre-pandemic. Then last year, the Africa Development Bank in their Africa's Growth and Performance Outlook estimated that 38 million people were going to slide into extreme poverty, which increases the number of people into extreme poverty. So we had this situation, and then obviously the pandemic was further compounded with all these extreme weather events. Everyone was affected in the north and in the south. So we saw all the floods in Europe. We had our cyclones and Cyclone Idai in Southern Africa. We've recently witnessed what has happened in Durban. But the impact is felt mostly by, the most vulnerable. And that's why this conversation around the climate crisis can only be discussed in the lens of justice, looking at who's been hard hit and how can they be supported through this process. Following all these events, obviously national governments announced recovery plans, tried to integrate the climate change aspects in trying to address the issues around the impact of climate change. But the picture that we had was that even as those plans were being put in place, there was an increase in investment in fossil fuels. We are 85% dependent on fossil fuels, so there were increases in emissions. We saw increases in temperature. Extreme weather events continued to occur. And just ahead of the summit, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change then issued the report, really raising a red flag, saying, there were clear warnings of worsening catastrophes and that something needed to be done. The context obviously was set, and there were very serious expectations in terms of, what is going to be discussed at the COP26, as countries were coming together, trying to, accelerate the actions towards meeting the targets of the Paris Agreement, obviously in terms of limiting global warming with a target of, 1.5 degrees, looking at addressing the impacts of, the changing climate, and also the funding that would go towards delivering these commitments. So it was very clear going into COP26 that the Earth system was failing and something needed to be done in order to change the course. And it's at this point that we wanted to have this discussion with our panelists to really look at, what was the level of ambition going into COP26, and what needed to be, and what was Africa's position going into COP26 with all these things that had happened, and what were countries willing to commit towards addressing issues that were affecting the most vulnerable. I would just like to confirm if our panelists have joined in. Kundai, can you just confirm if?
At the moment, we only have Alaji.
Okay.
The others have not yet joined.
Okay. So I'll start with Alhaji. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining. I know in Sierra Leone is 2 hours behind, so a very good morning to you. I'd just like you to just share. So when we talk about the COP26, there were a number of key issues that were discussed at the COP26. First, one of the central things was around, obviously, the sustainable recovery. So COVID was like the overarching aspect in terms of how do countries begin to move towards economic recovery. Then there was obviously the science and reports that were coming from the IPCC in terms of really raising those red flags and what needed to be done. There were discussions around adaptation, looking at what programs could be put in place to really support the vulnerable developing countries. One key aspect which really came out of this conversation was, investment towards supporting capacity building for countries, advancement in technologies, and there are local initiatives that have that people in Africa are being implemented in really trying to support this transition towards contributing to reducing the emissions. And Alhaji, your company that you have set up is really contributing towards that. I would like you to just share, the story of how you started out this company and what really drove you at the age of 18 to say, I would like to contribute towards, reducing the impacts of climate and really investing towards saying it's important that Africa begins to move into that trajectory. Can you just share briefly how you started out your company? And also let me just mention that Raxo Trading has been covered by different media platforms from the CNN to BBC and really showing the innovation that is happening through the company. Alhaji, over to you now.
Hello, Christabel, how are you?
Hi, you're on mute. Okay, now I can hear you. You can put up the video. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I went out for a while and the internet issues, and it was raining here and it's so early in the morning in Africa. And so, hello.
Yes, we can hear you. If you could just speak a little bit louder. You can actually stop the, okay, now we can see you. Yeah. Or you can try and switch off the video and then maybe we can hear your audio better.
Okay, yeah. So, so hello again, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. If you can just switch off the video and then maybe the audio could be better. Mm-hmm. We'll just check with his audio quickly and then we'll be able to reconnect back with him. But I'll probably just continue to while we are waiting for him to reconnect. Alhaji, are you back? Hello?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
I'm sorry. It is raining here in Freetown, so we're having a little bit of internet problems.
Mm-hmm. But we can hear you now, so you can proceed. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, as I was saying, my name is Alhaji Ahmad Sirajba. I'm a 23-year-old young entrepreneur, 22 years old young entrepreneur from Freetown, here in West Africa. We are just a little bit. Today we've expanded into hello.
Hello, The line is not very clear, so maybe we can give you, if you could just check your internet, and then we can give you another 5 minutes for you to just check your internet. You can join without the video, and maybe it will be clear.
Okay.
Can you speak now? Are you able to continue? Let's try and see. Yeah.
I think it is clear.
Yeah, now it's better.
Is it not? Yeah, sure.
Yes.
I'm able to continue.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so basically we started with child trading back in 2018 with just $20. Today we've grown to us. We are producing paper bags that have been produced from coconut shells. We are combating deforestation, air pollution, and improper waste management with this product, and we are also into poultry farming. And with the company that we started with just $20 today indirectly. And we've been in various media houses, CNN, BBC, Business Insider, and all. And we've won few international awards and national awards nationwide, and also expand to other countries in the Minor River Union for now in Guinea, Liberia, and Senegal. Guinea, Liberia, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire. Africa has a bigger problem. Something around 750 million people in Africa do not have access to clean cooking energy. Across the globe, 2 billion people do not have access to clean cooking energy to prepare their daily meal. Rather, they use charcoal from wood to prepare their daily meal. And 750 million of those people live in Africa. So that means we have bigger problem when it comes to clean cooking energy. So basically, in Sierra Leone, people have been using wood from coal for more than 100, and be like, hey, this is not eco-friendly and it's not good for the environment. You need to stop using this without providing something alternative and affordable for people. And my people in Sierra Leone care about costs. They care about environment, but they care more about costs. So we thought it fit that if we come with something more cheap and something more eco-friendly, we will be able to combat this other shells, which is which burns 4 hours longer than normal coal, and they are cheaper in cost when it comes to. They are also cheaper when it comes to cost, and so I think we've already got the solution for the problems in Sierra Leone, but it is not easy, even with the cost you need, because this has been here for centuries, and you need, before to change your mindset, it takes time and it takes energy and effort and everything. So yeah, we're trying our best to see what we can do, and that's the way we combat and these problems, and that's our solution for now and how we're doing it in Sierra Leone here. And we're looking forward to expanding to other countries.
Thank you so much for sharing. And maybe just, a quick follow-up before we go back to some of the main discussions of this dialogue. What kind of support have you received in terms of people or companies that have come in to invest, even locally in Sierra Leone, to really support this initiative?
Basically, Sierra Leone is a very poor country, and we understand that, and we've accepted that. So raising funds here is easy. I've not been able to raise any funds in Sierra Leone, and yeah, even without being able to raise funds in Sierra Leone, I've been trying to grow my company by investing revenue and also from other grants that I've got. And tried a lot, reaching out to ministries, trying to partner with other people, but they just not trying to accept that. And yeah, and this is not America or the Western world. We are in. You can just walk in. I'm a 22 years old, school dropout, a homeless boy 4 years ago. I wouldn't just walk into any ministry and be like, hey, this is a solution for your problem, and they listen to me without doing somebody, or in Sierra Leone, you need to know somebody for something to work for you out. So we do not have those connections. We do not. My dad is not a politician or maybe somebody known in in Sierra Leone. So it's been hard though, but without that, without the help of, without being receiving any help from Sierra Leone, we've been trying to grow our company by investing in revenue and working hard. And yeah, that's how we've been trying to do it.
No, thank you so much. Again, I would just like to extend apologies to our participants that we were expecting the two other panelists who had confirmed to join us, but have been unable to join us. We're still trying to reach them. But some of the key things we wanted to have a discussions with them on, I will just outline and obviously open it up for participants to have any questions and also to contribute to this conversation. So with regards to the outcomes from COP26, the first big issue going into COP26 for African countries was really around finance. The loss and damage was the biggest agenda going into COP26 in terms of how, as an African continent, we are one of the most vulnerable with regards to the impact of climate change. And I wanted to get a perspective from governments, in terms of going into COP26, what was their expectation and what was their position with regards to issues to do with loss and damage, and what they put forward as Africa's position and what really came out of COP26. As the conversations, one of the key things going into African countries, civil society organizations were really that would support vulnerable countries in terms of addressing what was the impact of addressing the impact of climate change. These conversations went on, but ultimately when it came to the pact, the climate pact at the end of, on November 13th, the finance facility was never agreed upon. And for African countries, obviously they agreed to the climate pact without that commitment that a finance facility would then be put in place. And this is one of the critical discussions that we wanted to have with the government representatives in terms of moving forward into COP27. What's Africa's position? Because out of Glasgow, the only agreement was that there would be conversations, what they termed as the Glasgow dialogues, that will continue bringing civil society, bringing policymakers to have conversations around this financing facility, but really there was no commitment towards that. The second aspect that we wanted to have a conversation on was in relation to mitigation. The level of ambition around, reducing emissions, particularly from the developed countries, there's really been limited progress. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the recent report shows that most of the developed countries are really not meeting their commitments and targets in terms of reducing emissions. And then secondly, during the COP26, there were a lot of discussions outside the main forum, where developed countries were making commitments to say they'll, put in certain initiatives to try and reduce, contribute towards reducing the emissions, but there was no accountability mechanism. Even if you look at the climate pact, there isn't a mechanism for accountability to make sure that countries are able to meet the targets that they have set. The wording is there in terms of stronger commitments towards reducing emissions so that we start lowering the global global warming, but in terms of and opportunities to hold these governments to account. And these are some of the things that we wanted to have a discussion with the government representatives. The other aspect, which is very important, is that countries are asked to revise their nationally determined contributions. with regards to the emission targets for 2030. So African countries are supposed to go with revised NDCs in terms of, what have set as targets for 2030. So it's important to explore how our African countries and positions to actually submit these, because we've got 6 months to go, less than 6 months to go to COP27. So, what is African countries, what are their priorities around meeting or changing what their emission targets for 2030? So it was going to be important to have this conversation. And if you have any contributions around these points, you can just raise them in the chat, and then we'll be able to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts on this. The other critical aspect we wanted to have a discussion with the government representatives was around how countries, African countries, what plans they've put in terms of transitioning and the energy transition and contributing to meeting the net zero 2050, whether African countries are ready to meet this net zero, and what plans are in place in terms of our energy transition plans, plans with regards to phasing down in terms of coal. But what is priority is that we are in the process where we're supposed to start implementing this phase down in relation to coal, but employees and people that are working in those sectors, what are the plans with regards to economic diversification? Because that needs to happen. Are African countries preparing towards this level of diversification where you begin to transition, so there's need for upskilling, there's need for reskilling, what plans are there in place that governments have put in place to make this transition into new sectors? And even as we are trying to go into new sectors, do we have the technologies, and who's going to drive that process? So it was important to have that conversation to hear what are the plans from government in that regard. The other aspect is really in relation to the work program around the adaptation. One critical work program which is focused on adaptation. So there's one component looking at strengthening the implementation of adaptation actions in vulnerable developing countries. And I wanted to know, how that aspect of that program, that African countries, and what is in it for them, and how are they utilizing this opportunity. Another important aspect really is around the finance, how the developed countries financing that will be made available for in relation to climate financing, the $100 billion to be given until 2020. There were discussions around having an extension towards that, but again, the process was not very committal in terms of how developed countries would increase and make sure that they are meeting this target. So it was going to be very important to really understand how African countries are mobilizing themselves towards making sure that these resources are made available, and how these resources are being channeled if they are coming into Africa, the various projects that are being implemented. So it was going to be important to get, perspectives also from the Zimbabwean government, from the Zambian government, in terms of the resources that they have received with regards to climate financing, and whether it has helped to actually begin to implement some of their plans, also in relation to transitioning. I would like to even open it up for any questions and any inputs around this conversation. As I indicated earlier, we were hoping to have the two government representatives who had confirmed, who were not able to join, but I've outlined some of the key issues, and you can either post in chat or raise your hand if you would like to give comments or share any insights around the outcomes from COP26, and then we'll be able to unmute you and be able to give you an opportunity to share.
Christopher, we have a contribution in the chat. Okay, I'll start with Sydney. Chisi would like to say something. Sydney.
Okay.
Good morning, guys and colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Christine, for highlighting the key issues that remain outstanding from COP26. Coming from a climate justice focused organization, I would like to highlight key fundamental things that is always going to be very difficult for African countries going into COP26, and maybe most likely going to give us a bit of a challenge going into COP27. And that is the issue of climate financing. If you look at the loss and damage impact that climate change is causing, especially into the global south, you can actually see that there is supposed to be a huge drive for acknowledgement, but also for obligations from the global north to ensure that the $100 billion pledge that they promised to facilitate for the global south countries is actually put into place. But however, because this did not happen at COP26, there were now negotiations that any other country which might want to access any money around climate finance would get that money through loans and not grants, which definitely would take into cognizance the issue of African countries running into a serious debt crisis. Already, many African countries are indebted, and to continuously borrow money to deal with issues of impact and effects of climate change would mean that many African countries are going to go into the vicious cycle of poverty and hopelessness. But however, because this did not happen, you might actually see that even countries like Zimbabwe have gone into a mode of extending their fossil fuel innovations and mining. Zimbabwe currently, it's not a big emitter of greenhouse gases. It sits on 0.07% of the global emissions. So it has got a very positive carbon budget. But however, because of the lack of commitment coming from the global north, Zimbabwe has also seen itself struggling to ensure that economically and industrially, it also pushes its coal mining. So the extension of coal mining in Zimbabwe could also be as a result of lack of commitment coming from the global north. Zimbabwe sits now at about 10.6 million tons of coal untouched. So the aspect of transitional just transition would also come into place to say how fair and how just is the manner in which the global north is pushing developing countries to move from fossil fuels to renewable energies. But even with such a low emission capacity from Zimbabwe, it doesn't mean that Zimbabwe and the globe have to relax and continue to emit such kind of things. So in 2021, Reina Trust and other state and non-state actors participated in the revision of the NDCs, and we moved from, Zimbabwe moved from reduction by 33% from the energy sector, which was the highest emission sector, to 40% economy-wide, which means now it includes the energy sector, it includes agriculture, it includes industrial processing, it also includes waste management. But however, if you look at that, you see that the biggest emitter of our greenhouse gases in Zimbabwe, it's our agriculture, forest, and other land uses, which is the backbone of the economy. But without critical knowledge transfer, technology transfer, and support from the global north, it would mean that countries in the global south will still have to rely on their natural resources to ensure that it covers the gap, especially the gaps of loss and damage. If you look at the damages that were caused by Cyclone Idai in Chimanimani areas of Zimbabwe and Chipinge areas of Zimbabwe, you could actually see that the recovery process, which also had resulted in forced displacements, would definitely be highly locally financed. And the challenge is that where would then the global south countries finance such kind of initiatives? So I still want to believe that if we had the opportunity of having government representatives, we could have get better information. But from a civil society point of view, we have got a general outlook to say, how do we build a climate justice movement that can actually set an agenda for Africa, a climate justice initiative that can also set an agenda for local initiatives, so that the monitoring and evaluation of all these systems and frameworks, they have got a managed aspect of how these funds would be used, even at a local level. The Zimbabwean budget of 2022 reduced its allocation towards climate and environment from 0.7 to 0.4. So in its essence, it means that even our local budgets as nations, we also need to have an evaluation and a monitoring to ensure that there are green budgets, they provide for green economies, but also allow for capacity building around adaptation and resilience of communities that are badly affected. For Zimbabwe, I'll give an example. We used to have only 5 agroecological regions, but now we have got 6. We used to have region 1 to region 5. Now we have got region 5B, which means that Zimbabwe is getting warmer, it's getting drier, and it is susceptible to all these fundamental climate crisis. So issues of climate financing should also be looked at from a local level, but also push for an agenda as we go to COP27 for a global commitment that is written in black and white, and we see those financial finances flowing down to countries that are more vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you've raised some very critical points, and I'll just like to start, I think, from the last point that you've raised. Very transparent, transparency and information, very clear in terms of how climate financing, where it's going and how it's being utilized in the different countries. The aspect around whether the money, additional money comes in as loans or additional money comes in as grants, it's obviously we don't want more burden in terms of African countries having to, accumulate more debt. We have a lot of debt already. And it will be important that, all these mechanisms, as things are being put in place, that there's a lot of consultation that happens with civil society, with policymakers, and it would have been good to have the perspectives from governments. I think another critical point that you've raised is around technology and capacity building, and all those nice words were outlined in the climate change pact in Glasgow, but what does that really mean in terms of translating into actual development, especially for the vulnerable countries and developing countries? I'd just like to open it up to more participants to share. I've seen some comments coming in. Kundai, is there anyone else who wants to give input?
Yes, if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Inos, by audio, do you mean you want to say something?
I've seen a comment from Boa. Would you like to share, because you do not agree with Sydney's perspective? I've also seen a chat from Vladimir, who's sharing perspectives on, from Zambia. So I think we can allow them to just share their perspective.
Doctor, you can go on, Dr. Haurobi.
Okay, thank you. It's tricky now because maybe the issues that we're going to raise in terms of questions or engagements might have been presented if we had the panelists before we commented, the panelists speaking before we commented, but I just need to maybe probe this issue of energy transition, especially for developing countries like, for example, Zimbabwe. When we trace the industrial revolutions or the development that this world has been undergoing through, we discover that as we speak about the fourth industrial revolution today, like the era of big data, technologies, artificial intelligence, and green economies and stuff, we find out that as a developing country, we did not reap enough benefits for the other three industrial revolutions that came before this one. For example, we have communities today which do not have access to electricity, which was maybe a discovery or invention of the second industrial revolution. So we have our fossil fuels, we have our coals, we have all these other sort of non-renewable energy sources that we are using to generate our power or electricity from. And then there comes the agenda for transitioning from fossil fuels into green energy. Well, the capacity thereof and the development or the spread of access to these basic amenities or services such as electricity is even very low when it comes to communities accessing electricity. So how then can we transition and be part of this fourth industrial revolution green economy era, while the fossils that we are burning even today are not getting us enough power? Then there is the issue of the financing of climate change or energy transitioning, and the seriousness that maybe our governments are taking this issue of energy, because many times it appears as if our governments or our communities are being caught unawares when it comes to natural disasters such as cyclones and flooding. But how much are the policymakers spreading this word or taking these things seriously in black and white, and in terms of making feasible policies that promote the green energy, feasible policies that spread the gospel, if I can use the word, of the need to combat climate change or to mitigate the effects of climate change. Our budgets, the national budgets, multilateral, bilateral financing arrangements, etc., etc. How much are the governments or how much are the people on the ground taking issues to do with climate change and the need to mitigate the effects of climate change seriously when it comes to maybe developing countries? Then lastly, I assume that there is an argument that at times the developed world must offer unconditional grants, even conditional grants per se, to the developing countries in terms of combating climate change or transitioning when it comes to energy. Aren't we trying or casting the blame for climate change and global warming at the industrialized or the developed countries? Whereas ourselves, yes, we might be low when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, but I think we should take this responsibility for green energy and the transition into green energy seriously at a local level without us beginning to look elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe before I give my few reflections on what you have shared, Kundai, is there anyone else who wants to give inputs to this discussion?
Yes, Vladimir had made a comment. Would you like to talk? Vladimir. And there is Boa, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll be brief, and I agree with most of the things that that were said. I just don't agree that we should claim our part in burning fossil fuels because the global north has done so. I mean, I think that argument is a bit unfounded. And I think rather we should focus on pushing for issues such as climate debt and ask the global north to sort of compensate the rest of the world for the damage they've caused. I don't think that saying that we also have the right to to make the damage. I don't think that's rational, and I think we should be more, because I mean climate change is a global phenomenon. It's not like, okay, Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe did not contribute much in a meeting, then we also have the right to emit. I don't think that is convincing enough. Yeah, that's yeah. I'm not comfortable with that argument, and I just wanted to raise that point.
Thank you so much. I think that's an important point. I think which brings in some of the roles that initiatives like the one which is being led by Alhaji Siraj, in terms of coming up with innovative ways that you are also contributing towards, reducing the emissions. But obviously the loss and damage is non-negotiable. I saw a comment from Justice also agreeing with Boa that, loss and damage is non-negotiable, and I think going into COP27, even as civil society organizations, even as governments, there is need to push further for this. It should not be left into a conversation and dialogue, but there must be tangible commitments from developed countries in terms of financing to support. If you look at the situation that happened in Durban, definitely the South African government is bearing the costs, but this is the largest, the biggest emitters, are just continuing to do what they're doing, in terms of continuing to emit, but the impact is coming down to us and to African countries. So I think this is it's a critical point. The other discussion that I would like us to have is really around how African countries are really prepared, which really brings together all the different comments that have come in. How are we prepared to transition, and whether we are ready to actually diversify. And I really wanted to have these discussions with the government representatives in terms of what plans are in place, and how are you bringing in the different key stakeholders to have input. Globally, there is just a push towards renewable energy. We have the minerals and the resources. So how are African countries preparing towards that? Because we have the green minerals, and which would support, that transition process, because what will happen is that all that extraction will come from Africa, and then it will go, and then we'll be left with nothing, and we don't have the technology to begin to move ahead. So how are countries really transitioning around that? There was a comment about African countries must do more to raise domestic resources. Yes, I think that's an important point. How do we immobilize resources, working with maybe private sector entities and trying to find resources that we could use to actually invest into advancing our technologies and helping us to adopt renewable energy technologies, and how do we support that process. There was a question for our Haji. I hope he's still on the line, to say, what's your message to African countries ahead of COP27? Our Haji?
I believe Alaji has dropped off.
Okay. So there was a question for him in terms of what is the message to African countries in relation to COP27. So I would like to invite any additional comments as we bring this conversation to a close. And again, apologies for not having the government panelists. They had confirmed to participate, and we'll just do a follow-up in terms of how we can engage further with them, because we wanted to get those perspectives from government on these critical issues with regards to how we are responding to the science as it's coming through. What plans are there in relation to adaptation, the finance aspects, the mitigation, what are the plans for African countries in contributing towards reducing the emissions, but importantly, what are the plans in terms of moving forward and the transition process regards to loss and damage, and wanted to get these insights from the government's perspective. So I'll allow for any last comments. I see Vladimir is on.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Christabel. I think I wanted to emphasize a point that the African governments must also take a lot of responsibility on their own, and not only look at the developed countries to provide resources. We must do more on our own to provide these resources to mitigate climate change. There are also the issue of taking forward these recommendations. These COP meetings have been ongoing for a long time, and all we see is African governments, they go, make all these commitments, but when they come to their countries, they do not do any follow-ups or any policy actions to ensure that these outcomes are domesticated or taken on board. I think this is what has been happening. It's a pattern where they just participate, but nothing happens. They must ensure that the policies are streamlined to ensure that they contribute towards the outcomes on mitigating climate change as it is agreed at the international level. I think this we need to hold our government accountable and follow up. For now, we had the COP26. Most governments have done little to take forward any outcome, any recommendations. We are going to COP27 just to have another talk show where governments come, talk, and they go back. We must monitor their actions and we must make them accountable.
Thank you so much. I think that what you have shared is the kind of conversation that we wanted to have with the government representatives in terms of how prepared are African countries. There was the Africa Group Negotiators meeting in March, and we wanted to get to understand, what is Africa's position moving forward, and what are member states in the African Union saying is our position going into our African COP27. I've seen, comments that are coming in terms of, what is our position moving forward as, non-state actors, civil society groups, communities that are affected by the impact of climate change. I think there are very clear positions from us in the sense that obviously the aspect of loss and damage is really non-negotiable. African countries need to be compensated and supported through this process. The commitments with regards to financing that was made available since 2009, how are those resources coming? Because we need to have reports to say the climate financing that has come to African countries, where is it going and how has it supported in the most vulnerable? And really having those transparent mechanisms, as some of the comments that came through. the other aspect is really around the issue to do with, building capacity and technology, supporting African countries with regards to reskilling, if people need to be upskilled as they move into different sectors, as we begin to use different technologies. I think we don't want a situation where we have technology which is being provided from developed countries, and they come in and provide that service, whilst we can build the skills and have the technology within our countries. We have the minerals, we have the resources. So how do we build that? And that's why it's important that African countries have a position and have a clear plan in terms of what are the transition plans. Yes, countries have developed the nationally determined contribution plans and everything, they are revising all that, but it should be very clear, and there should be constant consultation with key stakeholders in terms of how are they planning to implement this? How do you bring in the different stakeholders? How can we mobilize resources from domestically, from different companies and entities to support the transition plans? I'll allow for one or two comments before we bring this conversation to a close. I've seen some comments in the chat which have come from Demex. It talks about private sector together with government and should invest in renewable energy centers. Yeah, and then there was also a comment from Sibongile, who was also looking forward to get that conversation. I think one of the things we are going to try and do is to still try to reach out to the government representatives to have this conversation. It's important that they are able to engage with non-state actors, communities, to just give a clear understanding and picture of where we are going. And that's why it was important to talk to the chair of the African group of negotiators to really get to understand where is Africa and what is their position moving forward. I'll just allow for one last comment if there's anyone who wants to make a comment before we bring this conversation to a close. And thank you so much for everyone participating.
At the moment.
Okay, so thank you so much. And please do, yes.
Sorry, I think you heard no. We have 4 hands at the moment.
Okay. So
yes.
Maybe we could just allow them to give their input.
Owen, you can go ahead.
If you have your hand up, you can speak. We are giving you the right to speak. We're just gonna unmute all of you. If your hand is up, you can just go ahead and start.
Okay, thank you very much. I think moving forward, there is need for organizations like Southern African Trust to build the agency of activists, practitioners, and experts around issues of climate change within Africa. One of the fundamental things is to ensure that how do we build local climate justice movements, but also continental climate justice movements, to ensure that we localize the global conversations, but we also globalize the local conversations as well by bringing in strong citizen agents, so that at least we are able to push our own governments so as to be able to push the global players as well. It will be foolhardy for us to begin to go straight to Egypt and think of changing the global perspective without necessarily pushing an agenda to start changing our own local governments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to first thank the organizers of this important conversation. The first issue that I would like to raise is to do with the way how civil society organizations are operating within the SADC region. I think we don't speak with one voice. I think it's high time now we actually begin to work together and speak with one voice when it comes to environmental or climate change issues. So I think what is lacking is coordination of these civil society organizations or NGOs that are scattered from across the region. And it's high time for us as CSOs also we begin to work with our relevant government departments so that we can actually work together towards the development of our respective countries or even of our region. Then the second point is to do with our negotiators. We have, as civil society organizations, we must have clear asks or demands, and these we should actually clearly spell them to our national or regional group of negotiators to say, these are the demands from the civil society organizations or even NGOs from the region to say, this is our position. And we must be in a position to come up with a clear statement that we'll be actually sharing with our negotiators. Then lastly, I think as a region, I think there's something that needs to be done when it comes to, the way how we are actually conducting our business as CSOs. I think SAT has done exceptionally well in terms of actually coordinating this process. So as I said earlier on that we lack coordination within the region. I don't know whether it is feasible or possible that SAT could also be in a position to really try to organize CSOs or NGOs from within the region. Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any other last comments?
Yes, Christabel, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, I would like to thank SAT for organizing this space. I will not dwell much on the recommendations which my colleagues have already stated, but I think as civil society organizations in Southern Africa, we need to be more responsible and take responsibility, ensuring that we share information among ourselves. It's unfortunate that we are meeting at this space and we're coming from the same country, and yet there isn't a clear database of organizations working on climate justice. You have the faith-based organizations convening, you have the women's organizations and others working on extractives. I'm proposing that if SAT can then share a clear database of even the participants on this platform, so that when we go back, we can then reconvene and connect with other formations as well. For instance, in Malawi, I think 2 months ago, or last month, the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance had a climate change, a climate finance workshop, and not many people were aware of it. And if some had attended, there hasn't been a platform for feedback. So I actually reiterate what my former colleagues have said. We really need to enhance our coordination. We need to work together as a team. And if SAT can then support in ensuring that country focal persons are strengthened, I think that's the best way to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Some very, very good recommendations. Any other last comments? Great. So thank you so much, and to everyone for participating.
All right. I just had asked for a space to speak. Two things. I'm from Malawi, and I happen to have attended the conference the previous speaker spoke about. There was actually a communique that was developed at the end of the conference, and again, it is towards our preparation for COP27. So I would suggest that SAT gets in touch with the organizers. If you want some details, I can link you up with the National Coordinator for Civil Society Network on climate change. The other thing that I wanted to say is in relation to participation of the key populations as far as climate change issues are concerned. I work for Save the Children, and our interest actually is around children who we consider are born in the climate crisis. And I think their voice is very important, given that they are likely to face these issues for the rest of their lives, and therefore their voice is very important, that they should be heard. I think those are the two things that I wanted to bring to your attention. Thank you, and over.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the contribution and recommendations. In terms of the way forward, so we are running this series of dialogues building up until COP27. So we wanted to start this conversation to get perspectives from where governments are going and in terms of the direction. Then the follow-up conversations will be focused on different areas.
The phone is calling.
Yes. And the follow-up conversations will focus on different aspects, looking at the SADC position as they are moving towards COP27. We'll look at different areas, but all those updates, you could get them from our COP27 climate change subsite, which is on our website. And you get updated information in terms of the dialogues and conversations that we'll be hosting. In addition, I welcome the recommendation of how civil society organizations how can we work together within Southern Africa and coordinate that. And we will be happy to do that level of coordination and bring different civil society organizations, so we could have a platform where we can meet together and plan together as we move towards COP27, and also the engagements with policymakers. I'm not giving up from this conversation. We'll still reach out to policymakers to be able to get insights from them, and they need to have conversations with communities, with civil society organizations, even as they build up their position towards COP27. I also agree with the perspective that as African countries, we should not be waiting to get to COP27. What are the plans and what do we need to do? And those plans should be very clear even ahead of the meeting. So we will share the recording of this conversation, but also we will share with all the participants the upcoming dialogue, and also how we can convene and meet together and also plan activities that we can do in the different countries, and we'll be happy to coordinate that. So once we send information, it would be great if you could extend that to your different networks who can also be part of this planning and conversation, and so that we can have the Southern African coalition around climate change, and also helping us to plan what activities we can do during COP27. I think I've seen a comment coming from Sibongile, yes, and the youth groups. So we also, I think, have the Southern Africa Youth Forum on, who's part of this conversation. And definitely that will be a critical constituency to be part of this conversation. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and please be on the lookout for the next dialogue, which will happen in the last week of June. I think it must be on the 23rd week of June or the last week of June, and we'll share all the information and also the panelists. We also look forward to you being part of the panel conversation, and hopefully we can bring back the government this time, and they would make themselves available after confirming for some of the next dialogues. Thank you so much, and have a beautiful day. Thank you to everyone. Goodbye.